In the opulent boardroom of a $1.6 billion resort empire, a seasoned operations director was about to face the most devastating meeting of her career. What started as a routine quarterly review took a shocking turn when she came face to face with the CEO's enigmatic life coach, who would systematically dismantle everything she had built. Christine White wasn't your typical corporate executive. For 15 years, she had spent her life mastering crisis management across luxury properties worldwide, known for her ability to transform disasters into opportunities. When she encountered Victoria Cross's consciousness revolution, she had no idea she was walking into a sophisticated psychological trap that would strip away her authority, her team's loyalty, and ultimately her professional identity in the most brutal corporate takedown she never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The salt-tinged morning air carried the sound of waves crashing against the volcanic cliffs below, but Christine White barely noticed the breathtaking view from her corner office at the Grandview Maui Resort. Her fingers danced across 3 different keyboards, coordinating a crisis that threatened to spiral beyond her control. The celebrity wedding party, a tech mogul's daughter whose name alone could trend worldwide, had discovered bedbugs in their presidential suite 12 hours before the ceremony. "Elena, I need the penthouse suite stripped and sanitized within the hour." Christine spoke into her headset while simultaneously reviewing pest control reports on her secondary monitor. "And get me the backup catering arrangements for the reception. If we can't use the garden pavilion, we'll need to transform the ballroom in record time." Her assistant, Sarah Mitchell, appeared in the doorway with a tablet clutched to her chest. "The bride's publicist is threatening to post on social media. She's demanding a full refund plus compensation for emotional distress." "Not happening." Christine's voice carried the authority of 15 years in luxury hospitality. "Schedule a video call with the bride in 10 minutes. I'll handle this personally." The next 90 minutes unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance. Christine deployed her crisis management skills with surgical precision, coordinating with housekeeping, catering, and public relations, while personally reassuring the bride that her dream wedding would proceed without a hitch. She authorized an upgrade to the resort's most exclusive accommodations, arranged for complimentary spa treatments for the entire wedding party, and secured a private helicopter tour of the island as an added gesture of goodwill. By noon, the crisis had transformed into an opportunity. The bride's Instagram post praised Grandview's miraculous recovery and white glove service, garnering 50,000 likes within hours. The wedding would proceed as planned, the guests were delighted with their upgraded accommodations, and the resort's reputation remained pristine. "Masterful work as always," David Chen commented as he entered Christine's office. The regional manager for the Pacific Division carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the hospitality industry's intricate machinery. "I watched you turn a potential disaster into a marketing win." Christine allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. 15 years of crisis management teaches you that every problem is just a customer experience waiting to be optimized. She gestured toward the window, where the wedding party could be seen enjoying their upgraded oceanfront suite. "The guest satisfaction scores for this quarter are going to be phenomenal. Speaking of which, are you ready for the quarterly review call?" David glanced at his watch. Sterling's supposed to dial in at 1:30. The quarterly operations review was Christine's favorite ritual, a chance to present concrete evidence of her team's excellence to CEO Marcus Sterling and the corporate leadership team. Today's numbers were particularly impressive. Occupancy rates exceeded 90% across all 4 resort locations, guest satisfaction scores had reached an all-time high, and revenue projections showed they were on track to exceed annual targets by 12%. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah appeared again, this time with an expression of barely contained excitement. "The quarterly review call is starting early. Mr. Sterling wants to begin in 5 minutes." Christine's conference room transformed into a command center as she connected with resort managers from their Bali, Santorini, and Aspen locations. The familiar faces of her leadership team filled the wall-mounted screens, each location reporting record-breaking performance metrics. The satisfaction of presenting such stellar results never grew old, It validated every sacrifice she'd made to reach this pinnacle of her career. Marcus Sterling's face appeared on the main screen at exactly 1:30. At 52, he maintained the sharp features and silver hair that had graced countless business magazine covers. But Christine noticed something different about his demeanor. His usual executive confidence seemed strained, replaced by an almost nervous energy that made him appear younger and more vulnerable. "Outstanding work, everyone," Marcus began, his voice carrying less authority than usual. "These numbers are remarkable. Christine, your crisis management this morning was exemplary. I received a personal call from the bride's father praising our response." "Thank you, Marcus." The team executed flawlessly. Christine felt the familiar warmth of professional recognition, but something in Marcus's tone suggested more was coming. "Actually, I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce someone who's been instrumental in helping me develop a new strategic vision for Grandview Hospitality." Marcus's smile seemed forced as he gestured off-camera. "I'd like you all to meet Victoria Cross, our new strategic wellness director." The title didn't exist in Grandview's organizational chart. Christine would have known, but before she could process this information, a woman stepped into frame beside Marcus. Victoria Cross appeared to be in her early 40s, with auburn hair styled in loose waves and clothing that somehow managed to look both professional and bohemian. Her presence seemed to immediately alter the energy of the call. "Hello, everyone." Victoria's voice carried a throaty warmth that commanded attention. "I'm absolutely thrilled to be joining the Grandview family. Marcus has shared such inspiring visions of what we can accomplish together." Christine's confusion deepened. When had this position been created? Why hadn't she been consulted about a hire that would presumably impact resort operations? "Victoria brings a unique perspective to our industry," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke about her. "She's helped me understand that while our financial metrics are impressive, we need to examine the deeper spiritual fulfillment of our guest experiences." "Exactly," Victoria interjected, her smile radiating a confidence that seemed to fill the screen. "Numbers tell us what happened, but they don't reveal the transformative journey our guests experience. I believe we can revolutionize hospitality by focusing on energy alignment and authentic wellness, rather than traditional satisfaction metrics." The phrase energy alignment hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Christine glanced at David, who was frowning at his screen. Around the conference table, her team exchanged confused glances. "I'm sorry," Christine interrupted carefully, "but could you clarify what you mean by energy alignment in the context of resort operations?" Victoria's smile never wavered, but her eyes seemed to assess Christine with new interest. "That's exactly the kind of limiting paradigm we need to address. Traditional metrics, occupancy rates, revenue per guest, satisfaction scores, only measure surface-level transactions. What we should be measuring is the spiritual resonance between our staff and guests, the authentic wellness journeys we facilitate, and the holistic transformation our properties enable." "I see." Christine's voice remained professionally neutral, but internally she was reeling. "And how do we quantify spiritual resonance?" "Energy alignment assessments," Victoria replied as if this were perfectly obvious. "We replace traditional guest satisfaction surveys with tools that measure vibrational frequency, emotional authenticity, and transformative potential. When guests leave our properties, they shouldn't just feel satisfied, they should feel fundamentally changed." Sarah Mitchell, who had been silent throughout the call, suddenly leaned forward. "That sounds revolutionary. How do we implement these assessments?" Christine stared at her assistant in surprise. Sarah's enthusiasm seemed genuine, even eager, which was completely out of character for someone who typically approached new initiatives with professional skepticism. "I'm so glad you asked," Victoria beamed. "I'll be conducting comprehensive wellness audits at each property, starting with training sessions for all management staff. We'll transform how you think about guest services, employee engagement, and operational excellence." Marcus nodded approvingly. "I want everyone to understand that this isn't just an addition to our existing framework, it's an evolution. Victoria's approach will help us lead the industry in conscious hospitality." Christine felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. In one 30-minute call, Marcus had introduced a new executive position, announced a fundamental change in operational philosophy, and effectively subordinated her team to someone whose credentials she knew nothing about. The quarterly review she'd been anticipating, her moment to showcase the team's exceptional performance, had been hijacked by this strategic wellness director and her energy alignment assessment. "I'd like to review the specific metrics you're proposing," Christine said carefully, "and understand how they'll integrate with our existing performance indicators." Victoria's smile took on a slightly sharper edge. "Of course, but first we need to address the resistance I'm already sensing. Change is always challenging, especially when we're attached to outdated paradigms that no longer serve our highest purpose." The implication was clear. Questioning Victoria's methods revealed character flaws rather than legitimate professional concern. Christine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the conference room's air conditioning. "These quarterly numbers are remarkable," Victoria continued, gesturing toward the financial reports displayed on screen, "but they represent spiritually hollow achievement. Yes, you've maximized revenue and occupancy, but at what cost to authentic human connection? Our guests deserve more than efficient service. They deserve transformation." 15 years of exceptional performance, reduced to spiritually hollow achievement. Christine's jaw tightened as she processed the casual dismissal of everything she'd built. The call concluded with Victoria scheduling mandatory training sessions for all management staff, beginning the following week. As the screens went dark, Christine sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what had just happened to her carefully ordered world. "What the hell was that?" David muttered, echoing her thoughts. Christine stared at the blank screen where Victoria's confident smile had been moments before. Her instincts, honed by years of crisis management, were screaming that this was a threat unlike any she'd faced before. But how do you fight an enemy who wraps their attack in the language of wellness and spiritual growth? The salt-tinged air still carried the sound of waves, but now it felt like a warning rather than a welcome. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and Christine sensed that her perfect record of crisis management was about to face its ultimate test. The storm clouds that had gathered on the horizon materialized faster than Christine could have imagined. Within 72 hours of Victoria's introduction, mandatory energy alignment workshops were scheduled across all 4 resort locations. What had seemed like abstract corporate speak during the quarterly review call suddenly became very real as Christine received detailed implementation timelines that had clearly been developed before Victoria's grand announcement. "This has been in the works for weeks," Christine muttered to herself, scrolling through the comprehensive training materials that had appeared in her inbox Monday morning. The 40-page Holistic Hospitality Framework manual read like a fusion of business buzzwords and New Age philosophy, complete with diagrams showing energy flow patterns and consciousness elevation metrics. Sarah Mitchell knocked on her office door, carrying a stack of printed material. Victoria's team sent over the workshop schedules. "The first session is tomorrow at 9 a.m. in the main conference room." Victoria's team. Christine looked up sharply. "She's been here 3 days and already has a team." 2 wellness consultants flew in from California yesterday. "They're staying in the executive suites." Sarah's voice carried that same eager enthusiasm that had surprised Christine during the video call. "I've been reading about their methodology. It's fascinating how they're redefining guest satisfaction metrics." Christine studied her assistant's face, searching for any trace of the professional skepticism she'd come to rely on. Sarah had been with her for 3 years, working her way up from front desk coordinator to assistant operations director. She'd always been methodical, analytical, and appropriately cautious about new initiatives. This sudden conversion to Victoria's wellness philosophy felt completely out of character. "What specifically fascinates you about replacing guest satisfaction surveys with energy assessment?" Christine asked carefully. "Well, traditional surveys only capture surface-level feedback," Sarah replied, her words echoing Victoria's presentation almost verbatim, "but energy alignment assessments reveal the deeper transformative impact of the guest experience. We're not just providing accommodation, we're facilitating spiritual evolution." The phrase spiritual evolution sounded strange coming from someone who had spent the previous month optimizing housekeeping schedules and analyzing revenue per available room metric. Christine felt an uncomfortable knot forming in her stomach. The next morning's workshop transformed the familiar conference room into something resembling a corporate seance. Victoria had arranged the seating in a circle, replacing the traditional boardroom setup with what she called a collaborative energy formation. Soft instrumental music played in the background, and the overhead lights had been dimmed in favor of strategically placed candles that cast flickering shadows across the walls. "Welcome everyone to the beginning of our consciousness journey," Victoria began, her voice carrying that same throaty warmth that had commanded attention during the video call. She wore flowing linen pants and a silk blouse that somehow managed to look both professional and ethereal. "Today, we're going to explore how limiting paradigms have constrained our ability to serve our guests' deepest needs." Christine glanced around the circle, taking inventory of her management team's reaction. David Chen sat with his arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral but clearly skeptical. Elena Rodriguez, the guest services director, looked politely confused. James Harper from Human Resources was taking notes, though whether from genuine interest or professional obligation wasn't clear. "Before we begin," Victoria continued, "I want everyone to close their eyes and take 3 deep breaths. Feel the energy of this space. Notice how different it feels from our typical meeting environment." Christine kept her eyes open, watching as most of her team obediently followed Victoria's instructions. Sarah sat across from her, eyes closed, breathing deeply with what appeared to be genuine engagement. The sight sent another chill through Christine's chest. "Now, I want you to think about your worst guest complaint from the past month." Victoria's voice took on an almost hypnotic quality. "Don't think about how you resolved it. Instead, focus on the energy behind the complaint. What was the guest really asking for? What transformation were they seeking?" The exercise continued for 20 minutes, with Victoria guiding the group through various visualization techniques designed to help them access their intuitive hospitality wisdom. Christine found herself growing increasingly uncomfortable as she watched her seasoned professionals, people who had built successful careers on concrete metrics and proven operational methods, nodding along to concepts that had no basis in measurable reality. "Outstanding," Victoria concluded. "Now, let's discuss how we're going to implement our new spiritual fulfillment indices." The presentation that followed was a masterclass in corporate manipulation disguised as innovation. Victoria had created elaborate charts and graphs that looked impressively scientific while measuring completely subjective concepts. Guest aura brightness replaced traditional satisfaction scores, energy resonance levels supplanted revenue per guest metric. Consciousness elevation trajectories became the new standard for measuring repeat business. "I have a question," Christine interrupted during a particularly elaborate explanation of how to calculate transformative potential coefficients. "How do we validate the accuracy of these measurements? What's our quality control process for ensuring consistent results?" Victoria's smile remained warm, but her eyes sharpened slightly. "That's exactly the kind of left-brain thinking that's been holding us back. These metrics don't need traditional validation because they access truth through intuitive channels that transcend analytical limitations. But if we can't measure consistency, how do we know if our initiatives are working?" "You'll feel it," Victoria replied with absolute confidence. "When we align with authentic service energy, the results become self-evident. Trust replaces the need for validation." David Chen shifted in his seat, and Christine caught him suppressing what looked like a scoff. At least she wasn't completely alone in her skepticism. The workshop continued for another hour, with Victoria outlining implementation timelines that would fundamentally restructure how the resort operated. Guest check-in procedures would include energy alignment consultation. Housekeeping staff would receive training in consciousness-based cleaning techniques. Restaurant servers would learn to read customers' vibrational food preferences rather than simply taking orders. "This is revolutionary," Sarah commented during a brief break, her enthusiasm undimmed by the increasingly absurd suggestion. "Imagine how much more meaningful work becomes when we're facilitating genuine transformation, rather than just providing services." Christine stared at her assistant in growing alarm. Sarah's conversion seemed too complete, too rapid. In 3 days, she'd gone from analytical skeptic to true believer, parroting Victoria's language with disturbing fluency. The workshop concluded with Victoria announcing that she would be conducting individual coaching sessions with each manager to help them overcome their resistance patterns and limiting beliefs. The schedule she distributed showed Christine's session was scheduled for Friday afternoon, a time slot that felt less like an appointment and more like a summons. As the group dispersed, David Chen lingered behind. "Can we talk privately?" he asked quietly. They walked to Christine's office in silence, both sensing the need for discretion. Once the door closed, David's professional composure cracked. "What the hell is happening here?" he said, echoing his reaction from the quarterly review call. "We're replacing proven operational methods with crystal ball reading." "I've been asking myself the same question," Christine replied, feeling relieved to finally speak freely. "But what concerns me more is how quickly Sarah's bought into this. She's been with us for 3 years and she's never shown any interest in alternative wellness approaches." "It's not just Sarah," David said grimly. "I've been talking to the other regional manager. Marcus has been having individual meetings with key staff members, and they're all coming out of those sessions sounding like Victoria's promotional materials." The implications hit Christine like a physical blow. If Victoria was systematically converting her team members, Christine's position as operations director would become meaningless. She'd be isolated, undermined, and eventually replaced by someone more aligned with the new consciousness-based approach. "We need to document everything," she said, her crisis management instincts finally engaging. "Performance metrics, guest feedback, staff turnover rates. When this wellness revolution starts affecting actual operations, we'll need concrete evidence." David nodded. "I'll start gathering data from all 4 locations. But Christine, we need to be careful. I get the feeling that questioning Victoria's methods is going to be reframed as a personal failing rather than a professional concern." As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Victoria would like to see you in her office, Christine," she said. "It's urgent." Christine felt the ground shifting beneath her feet once again. "Victoria has an office? She's using the executive suite on the top floor," Sarah replied. "The one that used to be storage. She's transformed it into a wellness consultation space." The executive suite that used to be storage was actually Marcus Sterling's private retreat, a space he'd reserved for personal use during his visits to the resort. The fact that Victoria had claimed it as her own office space spoke volumes about the extent of her influence over the CEO. "I'll be right there," Christine said, her voice steady despite the anxiety building in her chest. As she walked toward the elevator, Christine realized that Victoria's wellness revolution wasn't just changing operational procedures, it was systematically dismantling the corporate structure that had taken her 15 years to master. The question was whether she could fight back before her carefully constructed career became another casualty of Victoria's transformative vision. The elevator doors closed, carrying her toward a confrontation that would determine whether she still had a place in the company she'd helped build. The elevator doors opened to reveal Marcus Sterling's former private sanctuary transformed into something resembling a high-end therapy office. The corporate decor had been replaced with flowing fabrics, crystals arranged on floating shelves, and the subtle scent of sandalwood that made Christine's nose wrinkle. Victoria sat behind a curved desk made of what appeared to be reclaimed driftwood, her fingers steepled as she smiled warmly at Christine's arrival. "Please, sit." Victoria gestured to a meditation cushion positioned in front of her desk. "I prefer authentic seating arrangements that encourage openness." Christine remained standing. "I'm comfortable here, thank you," Sarah said. "This was urgent?" "Everything is urgent when we're facilitating consciousness evolution," Victoria replied, her smile never wavering. "I wanted to discuss your resistance patterns. They're creating negative energy fields that could contaminate our transformation process." The casual dismissal of her professional concerns as resistance patterns sent a spike of anger through Christine's chest. "If you're referring to my questions about measurement validation, those are standard operational concerns, not resistance." "Exactly." Victoria leaned forward with the expression of someone who had just proven her point. "You're trapped in paradigms that prioritize measurement over meaning. This session is designed to help you release those limiting beliefs." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Victoria employing every corporate therapy technique to reframe Christine's legitimate business concerns as personal psychological issues. By the time Christine left the transformed office, she felt like she'd been through a psychological blender. her professional confidence systematically undermined by someone who spoke fluent manipulation, disguised as care. That evening, Christine sat in her apartment overlooking the Pacific, laptop open, determined to understand who Victoria Cross really was. The investigation that followed revealed a pattern that made her blood run cold. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria's LinkedIn profile claimed extensive experience in corporate consciousness consulting and transformational business architecture. But the companies she'd supposedly worked with either didn't exist or had no record of her employment. Her claimed PhD in holistic business psychology came from an unaccredited online institution that appeared to be a diploma mill. More disturbing were the legal documents Christine found buried in public records. Victoria had been sued by 3 different companies for fraudulent consulting practices. The most recent case, settled out of court just 8 months ago, involved allegations of financial misconduct at a tech startup in Silicon Valley. According to the complaint, Victoria had convinced the CEO to implement consciousness-based financial management that resulted in the company's near bankruptcy. The defendant systematically replaced proven business practices with pseudo-scientific methods. Read one court filing, causing operational chaos and financial losses exceeding $2. The pattern was consistent across all 3 lawsuits. Victoria would gain influence over a vulnerable CEO, implement her wellness-based business model, and systematically extract resources while the company deteriorated. Each case ended with the CEO defending Victoria even as their businesses crumbled. Christine's hands trembled as she printed the legal documents. This wasn't just corporate incompetence, it was a sophisticated con game targeting successful business leaders at their most vulnerable moment. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena Rodriguez. "Can we talk? Something's happening with the staff." They met at a coffee shop in downtown Lahaina, away from the resort's increasingly surveilled environment. Elena looked exhausted, her usually impeccable appearance showing signs of stress. "The staff morale surveys are showing numbers I've never seen," Elena said without preamble. "Turnover is up 30% since Victoria's workshops began. People are confused, frustrated, and some of our best employees are actively looking for other positions." "What are they saying?" Christine asked, though she suspected she knew, that they don't understand their jobs anymore. "The new service protocols are contradictory and impossible to implement. Housekeeping is supposed to sense which cleaning products align with each guest's energy, but when they ask for clarification, they're told their questions reveal spiritual resistance." Elena pulled out her phone, showing Christine a series of guest complaint emails. "Guest satisfaction scores have dropped 15 points in 2 weeks. People are complaining about confused staff, inconsistent service, and what one guest called creepy spiritual invasion of privacy." The evidence was mounting, but Christine knew from her research that facts alone wouldn't be enough. Victoria had already established herself as Marcus's spiritual advisor, which meant any criticism would be filtered through her influence. "There's something else," Elena continued. "Victoria's been having private meetings with Marcus almost daily. Yesterday, I saw them having lunch in his penthouse office. She was showing him financial projections that I've never seen before." The implications hit Christine like a physical blow. If Victoria was influencing Marcus's financial decisions the same way she'd affected the previous companies, Grandview Hospitality could be headed for disaster. Her phone rang. "David, Chen, we need to meet." His voice was tense. "I've been digging into Victoria's background, and what I found is going to shock you." They met at David's apartment that evening, where he spread out documents across his dining table like a detective building a case. The evidence he'd gathered painted an even more disturbing picture than Christine's research. "She's done this before," David said grimly. 3 companies in 5 years, all following the same pattern. She targets CEOs going through personal crises, divorce, death in the family, health scares, and positions herself as their spiritual guide. The documentation showed Victoria's method with clinical precision. She would study her target's vulnerabilities, then craft a persona that promised to solve their deepest insecurities. For the tech CEO, she'd promised to help him overcome imposter syndrome. For a retail chain owner, She'd offered to heal his relationship with his deceased father through corporate consciousness work. Marcus is going through a brutal divorce, David continued. His ex-wife is claiming half of his personal assets, and there are custody issues with their teenage daughter. He's been seeing therapists, but according to the gossip, Victoria convinced him that traditional therapy was keeping him trapped in victim consciousness. The pattern was becoming clear. Victoria didn't just target companies. She specifically sought out successful leaders at their most vulnerable moments, then systematically replaced their support systems with her own influence. Look at this. David handed Christine a financial document. This is from her last consulting engagement. She convinced the CEO to liquidate profitable divisions and invest in what she called consciousness-aligned assets. The company lost $40 million in 6 months. Christine stared at the numbers, her crisis management training finally clicking into place. She's not just incompetent, she's deliberately destructive. This looks like asset stripping disguised as spiritual transformation. That's what I think too, David agreed. But here's the scariest part. Look at the timeline. Each company showed dramatic initial improvement in employee satisfaction and media coverage. Victoria's very good at creating the appearance of success while gutting the actual business. The evidence was overwhelming, but Christine knew they faced an impossible challenge. Victoria had positioned herself as Marcus's spiritual advisor, which meant any criticism would be reframed as personal attacks on his healing journey. "We need to document everything," Christine said, her voice steady despite the fear building in her chest. "Guest complaints, staff turnover, operational metrics. When this wellness revolution starts affecting our bottom line, we'll need concrete evidence." "I'm already on it," David replied. "But Christine, we need to be prepared for the possibility that evidence won't be enough." Victoria's influence over Marcus goes deeper than business. She's convinced him that she's essential to his personal transformation. As Christine walked back to her apartment, the weight of the situation settled on her shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for her career, she was fighting to save a company that employed thousands of people across 4 countries. Victoria's pattern of destruction had found its biggest target yet, and Christine was running out of time to stop it. The salt air carried the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs, but now it sounded like a countdown. Storm clouds were gathering not just around her career, but around everything she'd spent 15 years helping to build. Tomorrow she would have to decide whether to present her evidence to Marcus directly, knowing that Victoria had already poisoned that well. The question was whether she could find a way to penetrate Victoria's psychological fortress before Grandview Hospitality became another casualty of her consciousness revolution. The countdown that had been echoing in Christine's ears reached its crescendo as she stood outside Marcus Sterling's executive office, a thick folder of evidence clutched in her. She'd spent the entire night preparing her presentation, organizing court documents, financial records and operational metrics into an irrefutable case against Victoria Cross. This was her moment, perhaps her only chance to save both her career and the company she'd devoted 15 years to building. "Mr. Sterling will see you now," his secretary announced, gesturing toward the mahogany doors that led to the CEO's inner sanctum. Christine entered to find Marcus standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silver hair catching the morning light as he gazed out at the Pacific. He looked older than she remembered, his successful executive bearing undermined by an almost fragile quality that made her heart ache with unexpected sympathy. "Christine, thank you for coming," he said, turning with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I understand you wanted to discuss some concerns about our transformation initiatives. Marcus, I've discovered some information about Victoria Cross that I believe you need to see immediately." Christine moved toward his conference table, spreading out the legal documents with practiced efficiency. "These are court records from her previous consulting engagements. There's a pattern of financial misconduct and good morning everyone." Victoria's voice cut through the room like a blade wrapped in silk. She entered uninvited, carrying a steaming cup of what appeared to be herbal tea, her presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. She wore a flowing emerald dress that somehow managed to look both professional and mystical, and her smile radiated the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. "Victoria, this is a private meeting," Christine said, her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. Oh, but that's exactly why I need to be here, Victoria replied, settling into a chair across from Christine as if she belonged there. Marcus called me this morning. He's concerned about the negative energy you've been projecting, and frankly, so am I. This intervention is exactly what your healing journey requires. Intervention? Christine stared at Marcus, who was avoiding her eye. Marcus, I requested this meeting to present evidence of professional misconduct. This isn't a personal issue. It's a business crisis. Victoria leaned forward with the expression of a therapist addressing a particularly difficult patient. That's exactly what I mean. You're so trapped in adversarial thinking that you can't see how your resistance is manifesting as attacks on the very people trying to help you grow. I'm not attacking anyone, Christine replied, her professional composure beginning to crack. I'm presenting factual evidence of fraudulent business practices. Victoria has been sued by 3 different companies for, Christine, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying a gentle but firm authority. I've already reviewed Victoria's background. Those lawsuits were filed by people who couldn't handle the transformational process. Change is always difficult, especially for those who are invested in maintaining limiting paradigms. The words sounded like Marcus, but the concepts were pure Victoria. Christine realized with growing horror that her evidence, meticulously researched and carefully documented, was being filtered through Victoria's psychological framework before it even reached Marcus's rational mind. Marcus, look at these financial reports, Christine pressed, pointing to the documents spread across the table. Her previous client lost $40 million in 6 months. Their operational metrics collapsed. This isn't about resistance to change. It's about systematic destruction of functional businesses. Victoria's smile never wavered, but her eyes sharpened with predatory focus. I can feel the fear-based energy radiating from you, Christine. It's actually quite fascinating from a psychological perspective. Your identity is so wrapped up in being the competent crisis manager that you can't allow yourself to be vulnerable enough for genuine transformation. My identity? Christine's voice rose despite her efforts to remain professional. I've spent 15 years building exceptional operational systems. I've managed crises, maximized revenue, and maintained the highest guest satisfaction scores in the industry. That's not identity. That's measurable achievement. Exactly, Victoria said, as if Christine had just proven her point. You're completely attached to external validation. But what happens when those achievements become obstacles to your spiritual evolution? When your need to be right becomes more important than your need to grow. The psychological trap was closing around Christine with masterful precision. Every piece of evidence she presented was being reframed as a symptom of her own limitations. Every professional concern was being transformed into a personal failing. Marcus, Christine turned to the CEO, desperation creeping into her voice. We've worked together for 8 years. You know my track record. You know my commitment to this company. Please, just look at these documents with fresh eyes. Marcus finally met her gaze, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. His eyes held the slightly glazed quality of someone who had surrendered critical thinking in favor of emotional comfort. He looked at her with the kind of pitying compassion reserved for people who refuse to accept help. Christine, I care about you too much to enable your self-destructive patterns, he said, his voice carrying Victoria's therapeutic cadence. Your dedication to this company has been extraordinary, but it's also been unhealthy. You've used work as a way to avoid dealing with deeper personal issues. Personal issues? Christine felt the last vestiges of her professional composure crumbling. Marcus, I don't have personal issues with professional performance metrics. Guest satisfaction scores have dropped 15 points since Victoria's workshops began. Staff turnover is up 30%. These are operational facts, not psychological symptoms. Victoria stood and moved to Marcus's side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder in a gesture that was simultaneously supportive and possessive. This is exactly what I was concerned about. Christine's attachment to control is so strong that she's willing to sabotage the company's transformation rather than examine her own resistance patterns. That's not, Christine began, but Victoria continued with the relentless momentum of someone who had orchestrated this entire conversation. I've seen this pattern before in my consulting work. High-achieving individuals who've built their entire identity around being indispensable often become the biggest obstacles to organizational growth. They create crises to maintain their sense of importance, then position themselves as the only solution. The accusation hit Christine like a physical blow. Victoria had taken her greatest strength, her crisis management skills, and transformed it into evidence of pathological behavior. 15 years of loyal service, of exceptional performance, of genuine dedication to the company's success, all reframed as symptoms of a dysfunctional need for control. Marcus, Christine's voice was barely above a whisper. You know that's not true. You know who I am. You know what I've contributed to this company. Marcus's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine sadness. I know you believe that, Christine. But Victoria has helped me understand that sometimes the people we care about most are the ones we're least able to see clearly. Your contributions have been remarkable, but they've also come at a cost to yourself and to the organization. I think what would be most healing for everyone, Victoria interjected, is if Christine took some time away from the company to focus on her personal growth. A sabbatical would give her the space she needs to examine these resistance patterns without the pressure of daily operational demands. The room fell silent, except for the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. Christine stared at the legal documents scattered across the conference table, evidence that should have been damning, proof that should have been irrefutable, and realized that facts were meaningless when filtered through Victoria's psychological manipulation. A sabbatical, she repeated, her voice hollow. Administrative leave. Marcus clarified, his tone gentle but final. Paid, of course. Take as much time as you need to realign your priorities and address these personal challenges. When you're ready to embrace our new operational philosophy, we'll be here waiting for you. Christine looked at the two of them standing together, the CEO she'd respected, and the consultant who was destroying everything she'd built, and realized that she had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the battle she was fighting. This wasn't about evidence or operational metrics or professional competence. This was about Victoria's ability to transform reality itself through the sheer force of her psychological manipulation. I see, Christine said, gathering her documents with hands that trembled slightly. I understand completely. As she walked toward the door, Victoria called out with what sounded like genuine concern. Christine, I hope you know that this comes from a place of love. Sometimes the people who challenge us the most are the ones offering us the greatest gift. Christine paused at the threshold, looking back at Marcus one final time. 15 years, she said quietly. I gave this company 15 years of my life. I hope Victoria's transformation is worth what you're about to lose. The mahogany doors closed behind her with a soft click, sealing her fate and leaving her standing in the hallway with the devastating realization that her career at Grandview Hospitality was over. Victoria had won the battle before Christine had even realized they were at war. The countdown had reached 0, and the explosion was just beginning. The explosion that had begun with the soft click of mahogany doors reverberated through Christine's life with devastating efficiency. Within hours of her sabbatical meeting, her corporate access cards were deactivated, her company phone disconnected, and her 15 years of accumulated authority reduced to a form letter from HR expressing gratitude for her service and hope for her personal healing journey. She sat in her Maui apartment, staring at the Pacific Ocean through floor-to-ceiling windows that had once represented success and now felt like barriers to a world she no longer belonged to. The irony wasn't lost on her. After 15 years of managing crises for others, she was helpless to manage her own. The business news cycle moved with ruthless speed. By the third day of her exile, Victoria Cross was appearing on CNBC's Power Lunch, her auburn hair perfectly styled as she discussed her revolutionary approach to corporate transformation. Christine watched in horrified fascination as Victoria spoke with the kind of confident authority that made pseudoscience sound like breakthrough innovation. Traditional business metrics tell us what happened, Victoria explained to the eager host, but they don't reveal the transformative journey that creates authentic customer loyalty. When we measure energy alignment instead of satisfaction scores, we discover that our guests aren't just buying accommodation, they're investing in spiritual evolution. The interview continued for 12 minutes, with Victoria positioning herself as a visionary leader who was disrupting the hospitality industry through conscious capitalism. There was no mention of her legal troubles, no discussion of her fabricated credentials, no acknowledgement of the operational chaos she was creating across Grandview's 4 locations. Her approach is already showing remarkable results, the host concluded. Grandview Hospitality stock has risen 8% since announcing their consciousness-based transformation, with investors excited about the potential for industry-wide disruption. Christine muted the television, her hands trembling with rage and helplessness. Victoria's media appearances were creating a feedback loop of validation that made her appear more credible with each interview. Wall Street loved disruption narratives, especially ones that promised to revolutionize traditional industries through spiritual innovation. Her phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. "Need to see you. Coffee shop on Front Street. Come alone." They met at a small cafe away from the resort, David's usually composed demeanor showing cracks of strain. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in days, his professional appearance undermined by the exhaustion of someone fighting a losing battle. "How are you holding up?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "I'm watching my career get dismantled on live television," Christine replied, stirring her coffee with mechanical precision. "Victoria's being hailed as a business visionary while I'm supposedly on a healing journey to address my resistance patterns." "It's worse than that," David said grimly. "She's moving faster than we anticipated." Sarah Mitchell was promoted to operations director yesterday. The announcement went out this morning, along with a company-wide memo about embracing transformational leadership. The news hit Christine like a physical blow. Sarah, her former assistant, her protégé, someone she'd mentored and trusted, had seamlessly stepped into the role that had taken Christine 15 years to earn. The betrayal felt more personal than professional, a reminder that Victoria's influence extended beyond corporate manipulation into the realm of human loyalty. "There's more," David continued. Elena Rodriguez submitted her resignation yesterday. She said she couldn't watch Victoria destroy the staff morale she'd spent 8 years building. James Harper is updating his LinkedIn profile, though he's trying to be discreet about it. Christine's support network was crumbling with surgical precision. Victoria had isolated her from her allies, promoted her former assistant to replace her, and created an environment where questioning the transformation was career suicide. "What about the operational metrics?" Christine asked. "The guest satisfaction scores, the staff turnover rate." "That's the most disturbing part," David replied. "Victoria's team is manipulating the data. They're sending out new survey forms that ask about energy alignment and transformative experiences instead of traditional satisfaction metrics. The results look impressive if you don't understand what they're actually measuring." The manipulation was even more sophisticated than Christine had realized. Victoria wasn't just implementing pseudo-scientific business practices. She was creating an alternate reality where those practices appeared successful. The new metrics would generate positive numbers that could be presented to investors and board members as evidence of transformation success. "And Marcus?" Christine's voice was barely above a whisper. "He's completely under her influence," David said. Yesterday he announced that Victoria will be presenting the quarterly results to the board next month. She's essentially running the company while he focuses on his personal consciousness evolution. The pattern was complete. Victoria had identified Marcus's vulnerabilities, isolated him from his support systems, and gradually assumed control of the company's operation. The same blueprint she'd used to destroy 3 previous businesses was being implemented at Grandview Hospitality, but on a much larger scale. "David, you need to get out," Christine said, her crisis management instincts finally engaging despite her personal devastation. "Update your LinkedIn profile. Reach out to your contacts. Victoria's going to destroy this company, and she'll take down anyone who threatens her control." "I can't just abandon ship," David protested. "We have thousands of employees across 4 locations. Someone needs to document what's happening. Then document it from a safe distance," Christine replied. "Because if you stay, you'll either become another casualty or another convert. Victoria's too skilled at this game for us to fight her directly." Her phone buzzed with a news alert. "Grandview Hospitality announces expansion plans. CEO Marcus Sterling credits consciousness revolution for record-breaking performance projections. Christine read the article with growing horror. Victoria had convinced Marcus to announce a massive expansion program, including plans to acquire 3 additional resort properties and launch a new transformational hospitality brand. The financial commitments were staggering. Nearly $200 million in leveraged investments based on projected performance metrics that existed only in Victoria's alternate reality. This is how she destroys companies, Christine realized. Her voice hollow with understanding. She creates the illusion of success to justify massive expansion, then uses the leverage to strip valuable assets. The company becomes so overextended that it can't survive when the illusion collapses. David leaned forward, his expression grim. How long do we have? Based on her previous pattern, 6 months, maybe less. She'll ride the media wave as long as possible, extract maximum value from the company's resources, then position herself as the visionary who tried to save a business that couldn't handle transformation. The scope of the disaster was becoming clear. Victoria wasn't just destroying Christine's career. She was orchestrating the systematic dismantling of a company that employed thousands of people and represented billions in shareholder value. The consciousness revolution was actually a sophisticated con game being played on a global scale. I need to warn the board, David said. There has to be someone who can see through her manipulation. The board members are getting the same treatment as Marcus, Christine replied. Victoria's team is probably already working on them individually, identifying their vulnerabilities and crafting personalized approaches. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the magnitude of what they were facing. Outside the cafe window, tourists walked by with the carefree energy of people on vacation, oblivious to the corporate disaster unfolding in the luxury resorts they were supporting. There's something else, David said finally. Elena Rodriguez is forming a support group for former employees, people who've been pushed out or who've quit in protest. She thinks we might be able to build a case if we can document enough evidence of Victoria's pattern. For the first time in days, Christine felt a spark of hope. How many people? 12 so far, but the number's growing. Elena's reach extends beyond just our resort. She's been in touch with staff from all 4 locations. Victoria's transformation is creating casualties everywhere, and some of them are ready to fight back. Christine stared out at the ocean, her mind racing through possibility. Victoria had won the corporate battle by controlling the narrative and isolating her opposition. But if they could build a coalition of displaced employees, document the pattern of destruction, and present a unified case to the right authorities, they might be able to expose her before she completed the company's destruction. Set up a meeting, Christine said, her voice gaining strength for the first time since her exile began. I want to hear what Elena's learned, and I want to know who else is ready to fight. The sabbatical that was supposed to break her spirit had instead given her the clarity to see the real battlefield. Victoria had won the first war, but the larger conflict was just beginning, and this time Christine would be fighting on her own terms, with allies who understood the stakes and the enemy they were facing. The explosion was spreading, but so was the resistance. The resistance that had begun as a spark of hope in a front street cafe grew into something far more powerful than Victoria Cross could have anticipated. Elena Rodriguez's apartment became an underground command center, her living room transformed into a war room where displaced employees gathered to share their stories and document the systematic destruction of everything they'd built. Christine arrived at the meeting to find 15 people crowded into Elena's modest space, their faces carrying the particular exhaustion that comes from watching something you love being dismantled by someone you can't fight. These weren't just disgruntled employees. They were seasoned professionals who had collectively devoted over 200 years to making Grandview hospitality exceptional. Thank you all for coming, Elena began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had made her so effective in guest services. I know this is risky for those of you still employed, but we've reached a point where silence is more dangerous than speaking out. The stories that followed painted a picture of accelerating chaos across all 4 resort locations. Michael Torres, the head chef from the Santorini property, described how Victoria's consciousness-based menu planning had resulted in guest complaints about inedible meals designed to elevate vibrational frequency. Lisa Chen, David's cousin who worked in accounting at the Aspen location, revealed that Victoria had redirected nearly $12 million from operational budgets into what she called transformational infrastructure investments, money that had vanished into consulting fees and unexplained wellness initiatives. "Good morning, everyone," Victoria began, her voice carrying the cold authority she had revealed during her emergency staff meeting. "I've called this meeting to address some serious allegations that have been made by former employees who are clearly struggling with the psychological challenges of our transformation process." But Margaret Torres cut her off with the kind of executive authority that comes from decades of boardroom experience. "Victoria, before you continue, I need to inform you that this board has received evidence of serious financial misconduct and fraud. We'll be addressing those allegations first." Victoria's confident smile never wavered, but Christine caught a flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. The look of a predator whose territory had been invaded. "I understand that change is difficult," Victoria replied, her voice carrying the therapeutic cadence that had seduced so many victims. "But we need to examine the motivation behind these allegations. The individuals making these claims are people who were unable to embrace our consciousness evolution and are now projecting their personal failures onto our transformation process." It was a masterful deflection, turning the board's concerns into evidence of their own psychological limitation. But this time, Victoria was facing opponents who had been forewarned about her manipulation techniques. "Victoria," Robert Kim interrupted, his voice carrying the steel that had made him a successful CFO. "We've reviewed the financial record. $12 million in operational funds have been redirected to shell companies that you control. This isn't about consciousness evolution, this is about embezzlement." For the first time since Christine had known her, Victoria Cross appeared genuinely surprised. The board members weren't responding to her psychological manipulation with the vulnerability she expected. Instead, they were confronting her with facts that couldn't be reframed as spiritual resistance. "I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding," Victoria began, but Margaret Torres cut her off again. "We have recordings, Victoria. Your own voice discussing how to manipulate the mark. Your term for Marcus and liquidate company assets for personal profit. Would you like us to play them?" The boardroom erupted as Victoria's facade cracked completely. The spiritual guide disappeared, replaced by something far more dangerous. A cornered predator who had been exposed and had nothing left to lose. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Victoria snarled, her therapeutic warmth replaced by naked aggression. "Marcus is psychologically dependent on my guidance. Without me, he'll have a complete breakdown. You'll destroy him if you try to remove." It was psychological blackmail delivered with surgical precision, but Marcus Sterling surprised everyone in the room. For the first time in weeks, he looked directly at Victoria with something approaching clarity. "Victoria," he said, his voice carrying traces of the executive authority that had built a billion-dollar empire. "I've been listening to the recordings they played. I heard you call me the Mark. I heard you laughing about my vulnerabilities with your team." The moment of clarity was devastating in its simplicity. Victoria's greatest weapon, her psychological control over Marcus, had been shattered by the evidence of her own contempt for him. "Marcus, you're not thinking clearly." Victoria tried desperately to regain control. "Your divorce, your daughter's problems, the stress of running this company. You need my guidance to maintain your emotional stability." But the spell was broken. Marcus Sterling looked around the boardroom at the faces of people he had worked with for years, then back at Victoria with the expression of someone awakening from a nightmare. "I resign as CEO, effective immediately," he announced, his voice growing stronger with each word. "And I recommend that the board terminate Victoria Cross and launch a full investigation into her activities." The boardroom fell silent except for the sound of Victoria's chair scraping against the floor as she stood. Her transformation was complete. The spiritual guide, the corporate manipulator, the psychological predator, all facades stripped away to reveal someone whose only remaining weapon was desperation. "You have no idea what you've done," she said, her voice carrying a threat that chilled everyone in the room. "I have enough recorded conversations with Marcus to destroy his reputation and his relationship with his daughter. I have psychological profiles on all of you that would make fascinating reading for your families and business associates." It was her final card, mutually assured destruction through the very manipulation techniques that had brought her to power. But Margaret Torres stood up with the calm authority of someone who had faced down corporate crises for 30 years. "Victoria Cross, you are terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Any attempt to release private recordings or personal information will result in immediate criminal prosecution." As security officers entered the boardroom, Victoria looked around at the faces of people who had finally seen through her deception. Her eyes found Christine's across the table, and for a moment, the two women stared at each other. The victim who had refused to stay quiet, and the predator who had finally met her match. "This isn't over," Victoria said as security approached her. "You have no idea how much damage I can do on my way out." But as the boardroom doors closed behind her, Christine realized that the real battle was just beginning. Victoria Cross had been exposed and removed, but the company she left behind was damaged, its leader broken, and its future uncertain. The resistance had won the war, but now they faced the even greater challenge of rebuilding what had been destroyed. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, indifferent to the corporate drama that had just concluded. But inside the boardroom, the survivors of Victoria's consciousness revolution were taking their first tentative steps toward healing the wounds she had inflicted on everything they had worked to build. The aftermath of Victoria Cross's dramatic removal from the boardroom unfolded with the swift precision of a crisis management protocol that Christine White knew by heart, though this time she was implementing it from the outside looking in. Within hours of the board's unanimous vote to terminate Victoria and launch a federal investigation into her activities, Grandview Hospitality transformed from a company in crisis to a crime scene under federal scrutiny. FBI financial crimes investigators arrived at the Honolulu headquarters before noon, armed with search warrants and forensic accountants, who began the painstaking process of tracing Victoria's money trail through multiple shell companies and offshore accounts. The scale of the embezzlement operation shocked even seasoned federal agents. Victoria had systematically extracted over $37 million from company operations, while creating the illusion of transformation success. "The sophistication of this scheme is remarkable," Agent Patricia Liu explained to the assembled board members during an emergency briefing. "She created an entire ecosystem of fraudulent entities, designed to funnel money out of the company while generating metrics that made her operations appear successful. We're looking at one of the most elaborate corporate fraud cases we've encountered." The immediate challenge facing the board was damage control on multiple fronts. Grandview's stock price had plummeted 18% when news of Victoria's termination broke. Investor confidence was shattered, and the expansion plans she had convinced Marcus to announce were revealed as elaborate fiction backed by fabricated financial projections. Margaret Torres, who had assumed interim leadership of the board, delivered the news that everyone in the room had been dreading. "The leverage Victoria convinced us to take on for the expansion has left us dangerously overextended. We have 60 days to restructure our debt obligations, or face the possibility of forced asset sales to cover our liabilities." The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. Victoria's scheme to force the company into financial crisis had succeeded even after her removal. The fictional expansion plans and fraudulent metrics had created real financial obligations that now threatened the company's survival. But in this moment of corporate devastation, an unexpected voice provided the first glimmer of hope. Marcus Sterling, who had been largely silent since his resignation, stood up with something approaching his former executive presence. "I take full responsibility for allowing this to happen," he began, his voice carrying the weight of genuine remorse. "My personal vulnerabilities made me susceptible to Victoria's manipulation, and my failure of leadership put this entire company at risk. But I want to propose something that might help us move forward." What Marcus proposed shocked everyone in the room. He offered to contribute his personal assets, including his shares in the company, his real estate holdings, and his investment portfolio, to help stabilize Grandview's financial position. The gesture represented a personal financial sacrifice of over $200 million. "This company means more to me than any personal wealth," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "I've spent 20 years building something that employs thousands of people and creates value for communities around the world. I won't let my failures destroy what so many people have worked to create. The board voted unanimously to accept Marcus's contribution, but they also faced the challenge of finding new leadership capable of guiding the company through its recovery. The obvious candidate was sitting across the table from them, though she had been systematically excluded from corporate decision-making for the past month. Christine, Margaret Torres said, turning to face the woman who had risked everything to expose Victoria's crimes, the board would like to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. We believe your integrity, operational expertise, and proven crisis management skills make you the right person to lead our recovery. The offer that should have represented the pinnacle of Christine's career instead felt like inheriting a burning building. Victoria's consciousness revolution had left Grandview Hospitality with depleted operational budgets, demoralized staff across all 4 locations, and guest satisfaction scores that had dropped to their lowest levels in company history. I'll accept the position, Christine replied, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of the challenge ahead, but only if the board understands that recovery will require some difficult decisions and complete transparency about our financial situation. The first difficult decision came within hours of her appointment. The Aspen and Santorini properties, while profitable, represented the company's most liquid assets and would need to be sold to service the debt obligations Victoria's schemes had created. The decision meant laying off over 400 employees and abandoning expansion plans that had been years in development. We're essentially performing surgery on ourselves to remove the cancer Victoria introduced, Christine explained to the leadership team during her first staff meeting as CEO. It's going to be painful, but it's the only way to ensure the company's long-term survival. Elena Rodriguez, who had been offered and accepted the position of Chief Operating Officer, provided the first comprehensive assessment of staff morale across all properties. The numbers were devastating. Employee turnover had reached 43%, with many of the company's most experienced professionals having either quit in protest or been pushed out during Victoria's purge of dissenting voices. The human cost of Victoria's manipulation extends far beyond financial fraud, Elena reported. She didn't just steal money, she destroyed the culture of excellence and mutual respect that took decades to build. Rebuilding trust with our remaining staff will be as challenging as fixing our financial problems. David Chen, who had been promoted to Chief Financial Officer, delivered equally sobering news about the company's operational metrics. Guest satisfaction scores had dropped 23 points across all properties, with common complaints including confused staff, inconsistent service, and what one review called bizarre spiritual intrusions into normal hospitality experience. Victoria's consciousness-based service protocols created operational chaos, David explained. Staff members are afraid to make decisions because they don't understand what's expected of them. We need to completely retrain our workforce while simultaneously managing a financial crisis. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from James Harper, who had been tasked with conducting exit interviews with departing employees. Victoria's psychological manipulation had extended beyond corporate strategy into personal destruction. She had systematically undermined the confidence and professional self-worth of anyone who questioned her methods. She didn't just fire people, James reported. She convinced them that their opposition to her transformation was evidence of personal failure. I've spoken with former employees who are questioning their entire careers because of how she reframed their expertise as spiritual resistance. The scope of Victoria's destruction was becoming clear. She hadn't just damaged a company, she had damaged the people who worked for. Recovery would require not just financial restructuring and operational reform, but psychological healing for hundreds of employees who had been systematically manipulated and demoralized. 3 days after taking the CEO position, Christine received news that provided both vindication and a sense of cosmic justice. Victoria Cross had been arrested at Los Angeles International Airport, attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with falsified documents and over $2 million in cash. Federal agents had been tracking her movements since her termination, and her desperate attempt to flee the country had provided additional evidence of her criminal intent. She won't be manipulating any more executives, Agent Liu informed Christine during a briefing call. The evidence you and your team provided was instrumental in building our case. We expect to recover a significant portion of the stolen funds through asset forfeiture, but even Victoria's arrest couldn't undo the damage she had inflicted. The consciousness revolution had left Grandview Hospitality wounded, financially strained, and facing an uncertain future. The company that had once been Christine's pride and joy now represented the greatest challenge of her career. As she sat in the CEO office that had once belonged to Marcus Sterling, looking out at the Pacific Ocean that had been the backdrop for both her greatest triumphs and her most devastating defeat, Christine realized that victory against Victoria Cross was only the beginning. The real test would be whether she could rebuild something authentic and sustainable from the wreckage of someone else's elaborate deception. The reckoning was complete, but the recovery was just beginning. Outside her window, the waves continued their eternal rhythm, indifferent to human ambitions, but somehow promising that even the most devastating storms eventually give way to calmer seas. The question was whether Christine White had the strength to navigate the journey from destruction to renewal, transforming herself from a victim of manipulation into a leader capable of healing the wounds Victoria Cross had inflicted on everything she touched. 6 months after Victoria Cross's arrest and conviction, Christine White stood on the same Maui resort balcony, where her crisis management skills had first impressed a tech mogul's daughter. But the woman looking out at the Pacific Ocean bore little resemblance to the operations director who had once defined herself entirely through corporate achievement. The journey from Victoria's victim to Grandview Hospitality's CEO had transformed her in ways she was still discovering. The quarterly board meeting she was preparing to address would mark the first time in the company's history that they could report genuine recovery from near-catastrophic fraud. The numbers told a story of methodical rebuilding. Guest satisfaction scores had climbed back to pre-Victoria levels, employee turnover had dropped to industry standards, and the company's stock price had recovered 80% of its post-scandal losses. The Maui numbers look exceptional, Elena Rodriguez commented as she joined Christine on the balcony, carrying tablets displaying the latest operational metrics. As Chief Operating Officer, Elena had become Christine's closest collaborator in rebuilding the company's damaged culture. Guest reviews are consistently mentioning the authenticity of our service. Ironic, considering that's exactly what Victoria claimed to be creating. The authenticity Elena referenced wasn't the manufactured spiritual experience Victoria had imposed, but something more fundamental, the genuine care and professionalism that had always distinguished Grandview's hospitality before it was corrupted by consciousness-based manipulation. Christine's first act as CEO had been to eliminate every trace of Victoria's wellness protocols, returning to the operational excellence that had built the company's reputation. Any word from Sarah? Christine asked, reviewing the staff development reports that showed remarkable improvement in employee confidence and job satisfaction. She's thriving at the Bali property, Elena replied with a smile that reflected the redemption story they had all witnessed. The promotion to regional manager was exactly what she needed to rebuild her confidence after what Victoria put her through. Sarah Mitchell's journey from manipulated accomplice to respected leader had become a symbol of the company's broader recovery. Her willingness to risk everything to expose Victoria's crimes had earned her not just forgiveness, but genuine respect from colleagues who understood how sophisticated the psychological manipulation had been. David Chen's voice carried across the resort's communication system, announcing the quarterly video conference that would showcase Grandview's transformation to investors and board members around the world. As Christine walked toward the conference room that had once been the site of Victoria's introduction to the company, she reflected on how completely the narrative had changed. The presentation that followed was a masterclass in authentic leadership. No consciousness elevation metrics, no energy alignment assessments, just clear operational data that demonstrated sustainable improvement, built on genuine employee engagement and guest satisfaction. The financial recovery was equally impressive. The sale of the Aspen and Santorini properties had not only covered Victoria's debt obligations, but provided capital for targeted improvements at the remaining location. The most significant change, Christine told the assembled board members and investors, isn't reflected in our financial metrics. It's the restoration of trust between management and staff, between the company and our guests, and between our leadership team and our shareholders. Victoria Cross taught us that wellness initiatives without operational integrity are not just worthless, they're dangerous. The questions that followed the presentation revealed how completely the business community's perception of Grandview had shifted. Instead of inquiries about innovative consciousness-based hospitality, investors wanted to understand the company's enhanced fraud detection systems, improved board oversight procedures, and employee protection protocols designed to prevent future manipulation. Margaret Torres, who had remained as board chairwoman, provided the context that made Christine's achievement even more remarkable. When Christine accepted the CEO position, our industry analysts gave Grandview a 30% chance of avoiding bankruptcy. The transformation she's led isn't just a business recovery, it's a case study in how authentic leadership can overcome sophisticated corporate fraud. But the meeting's most emotional moment came when Marcus Sterling joined the video conference from his home in California. The former CEO's appearance shocked everyone. He looked healthier and more relaxed than he had in years, his recovery from Victoria's psychological manipulation complete. "I want to personally thank Christine and her team," Marcus said, his voice carrying genuine warmth. "They didn't just save this company, they saved me from the consequences of my own vulnerability. The therapy and counseling I've received have helped me understand how manipulation works, and I've been working with federal authorities to help prevent other executives from falling victim to similar schemes." Marcus's commitment to helping other manipulation victims had become a second career. He was scheduled to speak at a corporate security conference the following month about recognizing and resisting psychological manipulation in business settings. Victoria Cross's conviction had been reported worldwide, but Marcus's prevention work was ensuring that her techniques wouldn't be easily replicated. The conference concluded with an announcement that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Grandview Hospitality was launching a new wellness initiative, but one grounded in practical employee benefits rather than spiritual manipulation. The program focused on genuine work-life balance, mental health support, and professional development opportunities. "We learned that authentic wellness comes from treating people with respect and providing them with the tools they need to succeed," Christine explained. "Not from consciousness-based metrics that prioritize feelings over facts." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the resort, Christine found herself in the exact spot where she had first encountered Victoria Cross through that fateful video call. The memory no longer carried the sting of professional devastation. Instead, it represented the beginning of a journey that had revealed strength she hadn't known she possessed. Elena joined her for a final review of the day's accomplishments, but their conversation was interrupted by a news alert on Christine's phone. Victoria Cross had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for corporate fraud, money laundering, and psychological manipulation. The judge's comments quoted in the article provided a fitting conclusion to the consciousness revolution that had nearly destroyed everything they'd built. The defendant's crimes represent a particularly insidious form of corporate fraud, the judge had stated. By weaponizing wellness language and therapeutic techniques, she not only stole money but damaged the psychological well-being of her victims. The sophistication of her manipulation makes her crimes especially reprehensible. 3 days later, Christine stood at the podium of the International Hospitality Management Conference in Las Vegas, addressing an audience of industry executives who had gathered to hear about Grandview's recovery. Her keynote speech, titled "Authentic Leadership in an Age of Corporate Manipulation," had drawn the largest conference attendance in years. "The most important lesson we learned," Christine told the audience of 800 hospitality professionals, "is that authentic transformation cannot be imposed from the outside through charismatic leadership or spiritual rhetoric. It must emerge from genuine respect for employees, guests, and stakeholders, built on operational excellence and ethical integrity." She described Victoria's methods in clinical detail,
helping other executives recognize the warning signs of corporate manipulation disguised as innovation. The speech concluded with a simple but powerful message that had become Christine's leadership philosophy: trust authentic actions over inspiring words, and never allow anyone to reframe your professional concerns as personal limitation. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just recognition of Grandview's recovery, it was acknowledgement that Christine White had transformed from a victim of manipulation into a leader who could help others avoid similar traps.
As she walked off the stage, Christine realized that her journey from operations director to CEO was complete. But her mission to prevent other Victoria Crosses from destroying companies and careers was just beginning.
The consciousness revolution had ended, but the authentic leadership revolution was just getting started. Outside the conference center, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly toward distant mountains, but Christine no longer saw horizons as barriers to overcome. Instead, she saw them as invitations to continue growing, learning and leading with the kind of integrity that could withstand any storm, even one disguised as spiritual enlightenment. The story that had begun with a bedbug crisis and a video call had evolved into something far more profound: proof that authentic leadership, grounded in genuine care for people and operational excellence, could triumph over even the most sophisticated manipulation. Victoria Cross was in prison, but the principles she had corrupted, wellness, transformation, and authentic leadership, had been reclaimed and restored to their rightful purpose. The new beginning was no longer just Grandview's story, it was a template for any leader willing to choose substance over style, integrity over inspiration, and authentic care over manufactured consciousness. The revolution Victoria had promised had finally arrived, but it looked nothing like what she had envisioned. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.